So before this video starts, I do want to say that some of the information here may be taken out of context, such as the Spanish encomienda system, which was adopted by both Portuguese and Spanish. If that is the case, please fact check and show me the correct answer in the comments. I would love to hear your feedback. Oh yeah, apologies for this. I forgot to mention one specific part. In this video, there was supposed to be an argument between J.C. Sherman and Philip T. Hoffman. They discussed their claims and their theses. Both of these claims are in opposition of one another, which can either prove that the world was more globalized or Europeanized between 1600 and 1750. I'm going to insert both of their claims here, okay? So I want you to pause and just quickly look. And without further ado, please sit back, grab a can of Coke or Pepsi, who really cares, and please enjoy this video essay. This did take me a very long time to make. In 1453, with the fall of the Silk Road, both Europe and Asia lost practically all their economic and political connections with one another, sending them down two very different paths. During this period, Europe conquered much of what they called the New World. On the other hand, other non-European empires gained and held considerable wealth and power during the same time period. Both sides were incredibly influential throughout history. So, was the world more globalized or Europeanized? Before beginning with our story, we must give you a basic overview of the two terms used most frequently in this video. Firstly, globalization. Globalization is the term used to describe how trade and technology have made the world a more connected and interdependent place. This isn't just limited to these two subjects, but can relate to anything that may peacefully bring together nations, groups, and other governments. A common misconception is that the Silk Road was a perfect example of globalization. And yes, that may be true in some regards, but due to a wide variety of different factors, the Silk Road cannot be considered a perfect example. Secondly, Europeanization. Europeanization is the term referring to the number of related phenomena and patterns of change within non-European and European subjects alike. This can be culture, languages, or a wide variety of other European features adopted by these subjects. We can use Brazil as an example, with 98.7% of the population speaking Portuguese, and even out of the native Brazilians, only 17.5% have not learned this dialect. Firstly, Europe. Hey guys, Nima here. Identifying Europeanization is not a problem, but it is rather complex. As such, I've created a Venn diagram to assist everyone in identifying Europeanization. This Venn diagram has three overlapping circles: influence, control, and contribution. These three circles make up a majority of the fundamental principles of identifying Europeanization. Let's start off with influence. The influence circle represents the cultural impact of Europe on the rest of the world. It would include the adoption of European languages, religions, and cultural beliefs. Secondly, the control circle. The control circle represents the political impact of Europe on the rest of the world. It would include the fact that European power has held a considerable amount of landmass on the planet, and the fact that European explorers mapped out a majority of the world as we know it today. Finally, the contribution circle. It represents the technological and economic impact of Europe on the rest of the world. It would also include the fact that European power, trade, economy, science, and technology have played a crucial role in shaping the world as we know today. And together, we get Europeanization. You get that, you big dum-dums? Back to you, Digital Jason.
Finally, now that you get it, let's see just what these European empires have done. We'll be talking about the Spanish Empire, the British, and the Portuguese. Starting with the Spanish, beautiful country, people, and culture, but also beautiful in empire. The Spanish Empire, apart from the Mongol and British empires, may have been the single most statistic empire the world has ever seen. You cheeky Spaniards. Their legacy left behind is way too complicated, but don't worry, Jason's here to help you. Essentially, the Spanish have done countless invaluable deeds for the Western world, such as, but not limited to, the spread of Christianity, the introduction of new crops and technologies, and the development of new cultural forms. But like all empires, they were often uncaring and downright brutes at many points. This can be seen with examples such as the forced displacement and exploitation of native populations, the destruction of traditional cultures and ways of life, and the ongoing struggle for social justice and decolonization. This form of cruelty wasn't justified to us nowadays, but this wasn't nowadays. Their conquest of the Aztec and Inca empires became a pivotal moment in world history. Their military might and technological superiority allowed the Spanish to establish control over vast territories. Tactics included military force, alliance with rival factions, the use of disease as a weapon. These Spaniards used smallpox like they were Bond villains. The extraction of immense amounts of wealth in the form of precious metals fueled the Spanish economy and expansion in Europe. This is relevant to Charman's claim, which is backed by the fact that the Spanish used their rivals as friends to strengthen themselves and amass substantial wealth boost to their economy, which made them the most powerful empire during the 1600s. Spanish colonization in Asia and Africa. The Spanish established a colony in the Philippines in the 16th century, and in the blink of an eye, it became an important hub for trade with China and other parts of Asia. A foothold in Morocco in the 16th century, but was unable to expand its influence beyond the region. In addition, a large reason for the growth was due to them being far more focused on trade and diplomacy in Asia and Africa compared to military conquest in the Americas. Thanks to this growth, the Spanish managed to establish control over its colonies far greater than its contemporaries, making it a beaming example of Europeanization. Did you get that? I want you to look at your notes that I hope you've written because it's time for Portuguese. Portugal established a global empire, quite literally owning half the world at one point. It left a mixed impact on the countries and people it colonized. The Portuguese introduced various technologies, crops, and cultural practices to their colonies, such as terracing and irrigation systems, European shipbuilding techniques, and navigational instruments. However, they also engaged in practices that exploited native population, such as encomienda system and the destruction of traditional cultures. Additionally, they established the first European sea route to India, bypassing overland routes previously controlled by Muslim traders, and established several fortified trading posts along the coast of India, Sri Lanka, and Southeast Asia. The Portuguese monopolized the spice trade for over a century, becoming one of the richest and most powerful countries in Europe. And to maintain this power, they used naval power and military tactics to establish trade posts and forts throughout Africa and Asia, subjugating many of the native populations. Portugal established colonies in Africa and Brazil, which were significant sources of resources and wealth. In Africa, traders established trading posts and forts to control the slave trade and extract resources such as gold and ivory. Oh yeah, the slave trade, I'll mention that later. In Brazil, they established sugar plantations and brought enslaved Africans to work them, dominating the sugar market in Europe and accumulating vast amounts of wealth. The Portuguese were tyrants, but they were incredibly influential. Their legacy evident in their language, religion, and cultural practices of their former colonies. Portuguese is still spoken in countries like Brazil, Angola, and Mozambique, while Christianity remains dominant. However, their colonization led to the exploitation of native populations, to the destruction of traditional cultures, and the drastic decline in number of tribes. Notable events during the period include the establishment of Mako as a trading post in 1620, and the issuance of the Regimento de Missões in 1695, which formalized the conversion of indigenous people in Brazil to Christianity and expanded Portuguese influence. The British Empire. The British Empire. The sun never sets on the British Empire is a common phrase used as a way to mention their incredible growth and their Lovecraftian size. The empire of this empire is tremendous. Practically every single concept empire and traditional set there in the Western was taken from the British. British colonized had far-reaching and complex impacts on the countries and people it colonized, as more of you would know. The British introduced new technologies, legal system, and infrastructure to many of the colonies, which did indeed manage to westernize these societies. You've never used a telephone? How about a radio, an electric light bulb? Have you heard of United States of America? None of those things would have existed if you weren't for these Englishmen. However, the British also engaged in exploitation of native populations, the suppression of local cultures and tradition, and the force of imposition of British value and beliefs. Economic exploitation and political control marked the British Empire's dominance in its colonized regions. British colonization was characterized by the establishment of settler colonies in areas such as Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, marked by the displacement or marginalization of indigenous people, a truly horrid period. Indigenous children were often sent off to resident schools where they would be beaten, assaulted, and some even raped, all in the name of changing them. But let me ask you this, does changing always mean progress? For these children, many as young as 6, it sure as hell wasn't. British dominance in South Asia was marked by the economic exploitation and political control. The British East India Company gained control of Indian economy and drained its resources, leading to famine and poverty for many Indians. The British used their military and political power to suppress Indian uprising and maintain their rule, imposing their values and beliefs in Indian society. This led to the erosion of traditional cultural practices and its replacement by Western ideas and institutions. Many rural children were often sent to work in the blistering diamond, gold, or coal mines. It's amazing how millions withstood this for decades. British colonization in Africa. British colonization in Africa was marked by the economic exploitation and political control. The same was true in Southern Asia. The British exploited the continent's resources and established artificial borders that continue to cause conflict and instability today. Additionally, the British engaged in the slave trade and forced labor, which led to the depopulation and displacement of many African communities. The British imposed their values and beliefs of African society, leading to the erosion of traditional cultural practices and the spread of Western ideas and institutions. The system of apartheid was adopted by the British. British colonization in North America was characterized by the establishment of settler colonies, such as Canada and the United States. These colonies were marked by the displacement and marginalization of indigenous people, as well as the importance of European settlers. The British also engaged in economic exploitation in North America, including exploitation of resources such as timber and fur. The British imposed their value and belief on colonial society, leading to the spread of the English language and culture throughout the region. Of course, once a specific colony did successfully revolt in 1775, named the United States of America. Now, what were their impacts? In India, the British introduced the English language and the education, as well as infrastructure that helped modernize the country. However, they also drained India's resources, suppressed Indian uprising. In Africa, the British imposed their values and beliefs on African society, leading to the erosion of traditional cultural practices. They also exploited the continent's resources and engaged in slave trade and forced labor, leading to the depopulation and displacement of many African communities. In North America, the British imposed their values and beliefs of colonial society, leading to the spread of the English language and culture throughout the religion. They also engaged in economic exploitation and displacement and marginalization of indigenous people. But before anything else, we have to talk about the Atlantic slave trade. The Atlantic slave trade was the forced transportation of millions of Africans from West and Central Africa to the Americas between the 16th and 19th century. It was a horrific human rights violation with lasting impacts on Africa's societies and the global economy. The Atlantic slave trade significantly impacted the question of whether the world was more globalized or Europeanized between the 1600s to the 1750s. The trade connected Africa, Europe, and the Americas in a complex network of economic exchange. European exploration of Africa for gold led to the capture of and sale of Africans as slaves, meeting the demand for labor in European colonies in the Americas. This trade route facilitated the exchange of goods, labor, and ideas between continents, contributing to the globalization of trade and the interconnection of different regions. At the time, the slave trade primarily benefited European powers who accumulated immense wealth and power through the exploitation of African labor. The trade also deepened European dominance, the influence over the Americas, reinforcing a European-centric perspective. Therefore, while the slave trade contributed to the global connections, it also reinforced European dominance, making the world more Europeanized during this period. Now, you have your notes, right? Because I'm going to ask you some questions, and I want you to answer them as fast as you can.
Unlike Europeanization, this Venn diagram only has two that will totally not change. These two circles are economic ties and political connections. Firstly, economic ties. What do I mean by this? Well, economic ties may be examples of trade between two nations or the equilibrium between two different groups as they are dependent on one another for a specific resource. This can be seen nowadays with China becoming the manufacturing capital of the world. Other economies, such as the United States, can manufacture products domestically, but the inherent benefits of outsourcing this manufacturing outweigh making it domestic. However, economic ties may just be the trade between two different ethnic groups, as shown 600, 500, 300 years ago. You got that? Great. Secondly, we have political connections. How are these two groups diplomatically connected? Or how are these nations diplomatically connected? This example can be seen in our modern world, with alliances between different groups of people working together for not only the benefits of their own nation, but for the benefit of their citizens as well. So, to sum it all up for you big dum-dums, the two questions you need to ask are, what were their political ties, and how did their economy operate? You get that? Great. Back to you, Digital Nemo. Starting off with the Qings. The Qing dynasty shouldn't be viewed by their horrifying loss to both the Japanese and the People's Republic of China, but rather as once the most economically powerful and diplomatically sound empire that the world had ever seen. As examples of China's diplomatic dominance, we see throughout history that the Qing established ties with countless European powers, mainly the French, British, and Russian, which brought in greater cultural exchange and understanding. Oh yeah, cultural discussions. Real Nima, put that on the Venn diagram. These relationships helped the Chinese nation's sovereignty and prevented foreign powers from exerting influence over the nation. Moving on to the Qing's economic success, their biggest weapon in supporting the claim of globalization between 1600 and 1750. There were four factors determining their success. Number 1, trade expansion. The Qing dynasty fostered the expansion of trade, both within its borders and internationally. For instance, the establishment of the Grand Canal connecting Beijing and Hangzhou facilitated the movement of goods and communication between different regions of the empire. This enhanced domestic trade networks, encouraging economic integration within the empire and promoting globalization. Number 2, the agricultural revolution. The Qing dynasty implemented policies to boost agricultural productivity, resulting in a surplus of food production and population growth. The surplus agricultural products not only supported the growing population but also contributed to international trade, as these goods were often exported to other countries, further connecting the Qing dynasty to the global economy. Number 3, manufacturing and craftsmanship. The Qing dynasty was renowned for its manufacturing and craftsmanship, producing high-quality goods at low cost. The government established workshops and factories to manufacture items such as porcelain, silk, and textiles. These goods gained popularity both domestically and internationally, contributing to global trade and spreading Chinese culture and influence across Borders. Number 4. Foreign trade networks. The Qing dynasty actively engaged in international trade with nations like Britain, France, and the Netherlands. To facilitate foreign trade, the government established trading posts and regulations. Of course, the Qing, much like every other empire, were brutal in their own ways. The destruction they ensured wasn't just militaristic, it was cultural too. Examples include: during the Qing dynasty, many cultural artifacts were destroyed or lost due to neglect or war. For example, the Old Summer Palace, which was a massive complex of palaces and gardens in Beijing, was burnt down by the British and French troops in 1860. Many other cultural sites were also damaged or destroyed during this time. Harmful policies. The Qing dynasty implemented several policies that were harmful to its people. The government also implemented a series of discriminatory policies against ethnic minorities, such as the Mongols and Tibetans. The Qing dynasty's legacy appears to have been somewhat disregarded. Yes, they were isolated from the world for a large portion of their reign, but much like feudal Japan, trade was still very much alive in the dynasty, both domestically and internationally. And yes, they were brutal, but which empire wasn't? I am not justifying their actions, but it's a point you must understand. In reality, their legacy was vital for humanity as a whole. Their influence on global trade shaped the modern blueprint for globalization we see today. Examples of the dynasty's legacy include the Forbidden City, Great Wall of China, and the practice of foot binding, which, although now considered inhumane, is a reflection of their societal and cultural norms. Now, let's move on to the Mughal Empire. The Mughals, at their peak, were the most artistically and culturally sound period in not just India, but a vast portion of southern Asia. The Mughal economy was vast in comparison to other nations. Without the example of the Qing, it was the economic anchor of southern Asia. The Mughal Empire was known for its flourishing economy, which was primarily driven by trade. The empire's vast territory, unified administrative system, and well-developed infrastructure allowed for a smooth flow of goods and people across different regions, much like that of India today. The Mughal economy was based off a variety of different industries, including textiles, agriculture, and handicrafts. Textile production was particularly critical in the development of its economy, with India being a major producer of cotton and silk fabrics that were in high demand across the world, even after the Atlantic slave trade took over. Agriculture was also a significant contributor to the economy, with the cultivation of crops such as rice, wheat, and sugarcane. The Mughals also encouraged the growth of handicrafts such as pottery and jewelry, which were highly valued and sought after. Here is a photo of Mughal jewelry, and here's one of Mughal pottery. Yes, while that piece of ceramic may be beautiful, what about the Mughals' influence? What about their dominance? The Mughal Empire was one of the most powerful and influential empires of its time. Its military might allowed for it to expand its territory and control important trade routes, which further strengthened its economic and political power. The empire's influence extended beyond just military and economic dominance. It also played a crucial role in shaping the cultural and religious landscapes of the region. The Mughals were great patrons of art and literature, and their influence can be seen in the rich legacy of music, dance, architecture, and literature that continues to flourish in southern Asia today. The Mughals' impact on South Asia and the world at large is significant and enduring. Its architectural marvels, such as the Taj Mahal and the Red Fort, just continue to inspire and attract visitors from all over the world. The Mughals played a key role in the development of the Urdu language, which is still spoken and cherished by millions of people in Southern Asia till this day. The empire's legacy is not only limited to just culture and language, it also left an indelible mark on the political and economic systems of the region. However, while the Mughal Empire was a powerful and influential force in its time, it was not without its shortcomings. Corruption, mismanagement, and lavish spending by Mughal rulers and officials led to the decline in the overall standard of living and growing discontent among the populace. There were also instances of religious persecution and discrimination against minority communities, particularly Hindus and Sikhs. The Mughal Empire began to experience economic decline towards the end of its reign due to a depletion of resources and its slow adaptation to the changing global economic trends. Political instability, weak leadership, and the rise of regional powers ultimately contributed to the empire's downfall. Yes, but what was their role in globalization? The Mughal Empire played a crucial role in the process of globalization during its time. Its trade connections with other regions of the world, particularly Europe and Southeast Asia, allowed for exchange of goods, ideas, and culture. The empire was a hub of trade and commerce, attracting merchants and traders from far and wide who came to participate in the thriving economy. In short, the Mughal Empire is critical to a discussion when talking about the globalization of the world. While their fall at the hands of the British Empire has been used against them at times, we cannot let it define the legacy of that empire. Their role in globalization must also not be disregarded, nor should its downsides. Like all empires, it eventually collapsed, but at its peak, it was the world's center for cultural development. Commonly known for their onion-like hats, this empire sprouted up from the ashes of the Byzantine Empire in 1453, leading to the fall of the Silk Road. The Ottomans were easily the biggest power in the Middle East, Europe, and Asia Minor at their peak. Starting off with their economy, the Ottomans possessed one of the most complex economies of their time, heavily influenced by their location as the connection between Asia and Europe. Its economy was based off agriculture, trade, and manufacturing, with a focus on producing goods for export. The Ottomans were also known for their sophisticated system of taxation, which helped fund the empire's military campaigns and infrastructure projects. As the Ottoman Empire expanded, its economy became more integrated with the global economy. The Ottomans established trading relationships with European powers, and they became major exporters of goods such as silk, spices, and textiles. Ottoman merchants also played a crucial role in trans-Saharan trade networks, which connected West Africa to the Mediterranean world. While they resulted in the collapse of the Silk Road, they didn't mark the end of trade between these two regions, something everyone should recognize. As not only does this counteract the idea that Europe expanded mainly from a lack of trade, but also completely disregards it, showing us a period in history where there were economic ties and political connections through both continents. Doesn't that sound oddly familiar? Of course, it could be refuted by saying that the Europeans were simply looking for routes that they themselves would control. But that does not make a good point in opposition to my claim. Well, what about Ottoman influence? The Ottoman Empire was one of the most powerful and influential empires in world history. At its height in the 16th and 17th centuries, the Ottoman Empire controlled much of southeastern Europe, Western Asia, and northern Africa. Its military prowess, cultural achievements, and diplomatic power made it a dominant force in the region. The Ottomans helped control possibly the most important land in the world, being the gateway that connected much of the known world together. Their army was very large, and their only job was to protect that land and prepare for battle in a minute's notice. The Ottomans were well known for their tolerance of different cultures and religions, and they attracted people from all over the world to their empire. This diversity helped spread Ottoman culture and influence throughout the world, especially in the fields of art, architecture, and literature. The spread of culture was mainly facilitated by the Ottomans, with the majority of this exchange happening within their own borders. As such, there may be a high chance that the Ottomans did not truly spread the word of Islam as far as we previously thought. The Ottomans also used torture as a means of punishment, and cruel, unusual punishments were often inflicted on criminals. For example, criminals convicted of theft could have their hands amputated, while those convicted of adultery could be stoned to death. The Ottomans' brutality was not limited to warfare and punishment. It also extended to the treatment of minority groups within the empire, particularly non-Muslims. While the Ottomans were known for their relative tolerance of different religions, non-Muslims were often subject to discriminatory laws and forced to pay additional taxes. Well, what about its legacy? The Ottoman Empire left a lasting legacy on the world. Its system of governance, which combined elements of Islamic law, Ottoman law, and European legal systems, influenced the development of modern legal systems, and in many cultures, it's still used today. The Ottomans also played a significant role in the development of science, technology, and medicine during its time. And what role did they play in globalization? The Ottoman Empire played a significant role in the process of globalization, especially during the early modern period. The Ottomans were active participants in the global trade network, and their empire was a hub for the exchange of goods, peoples, and ideas. The Ottoman Empire was also a major center of learning, with scholars and intellectuals from all over the world coming to study in Ottoman universities and libraries. This exchange of knowledge helped spread ideas and innovations across the world, contributing to the development of modern science and technology. To summarize, the Ottoman Empire helped shape the world as we know it today. Its economy was based off trade and manufacturing, and it quickly rose to prominence in the global trade network. The Ottomans were known for their military prowess, cultural accomplishments, and diplomatic power, and they left a lasting legacy in law, science, technology, and art. However, their brutal battlefield tactics must not be overlooked. They had forced conversions and discriminatory laws against minority groups.
Hey, we couldn't get the other whiteboard room again, so here's the next best thing. We have two sides. If you haven't noticed so far, there's a reason that we pick exactly 3 empires for each side, to fit perfectly within the Venn diagram. Europeanization can be understood through 3 key aspects: influence, control, and contribution. Spain's influence on its colonies served as a catalyst for European powers' pursuit of colonization. The British Empire exerted unparalleled politics control through various methods such as direct and indirect rule, divide and rule, tactics, and economic exploitation. The Portuguese make significant contribution, notably through Christopher Columbus, whose exploration greatly impacted trade and exchange. Moving on to globalization, it revolves around economic ties, political connections, and also cultural exchanges. The Qing dynasty fostered economic ties through policies like the Canton system and effective taxation, which facilitated trade and contribution to its status as well as a wealthy nation. The Ottoman Empire, within its centralized government, military strength, religious tolerance, and strategic alliances, had significant political influence for centuries. The Mughal Empire, particularly under Akbar, made notable cultural contributions, establishing itself as a center of art and literature. In conclusion, these historical dynamics of Europeanization and globalization shaped the world we live in today.
What is my opinion? I've given you examples, information, and so much more, but I haven't given you a full, unbiased answer. Surely you've written notes. If not, please do. Both sides provide tremendous analysis, and while both do contradict one another, it provides enough evidence that the contradictions do not matter. I can't really choose between either one, so let's look at one final example to get our last view. Our modern world. I think the biggest problem is the fact that Europeanization is inherently a key element of globalization. It shares just too many of the same aspects to be considered its own thing. I spent hours debating this, as have experts, but when we look back over 250 years later, we still see a bit of everything from both sides. We see the Brazilians speaking Portuguese, and we see the components of the Qing in modern-day China. From my personal experience, I strongly resonate with globalization. But why? I've looked at the modern world. I live in the information age. Without the internet, this video wouldn't even exist. And what's most often used as a perfect example of globalization? Not the Silk Road, but rather the internet. Of course, I've given you all the tools you need to make your own choice. That's all. I'm Neil Betiari.
And I'm Jason Tian.
And I thank you for your time.